Hey everybody, we are live here from MacroPolo headquarters here in Chicago. I'm Damien. For those who don't know me, I direct the MacroPolo think tank at the Paulson Institute, and we're based out of Chicago. And today I'm delighted that Keisha Brown is with us. I'm so happy she's able to do this on such short notice. I kind of dragged her into it very quickly. So for those of you who don't know her, she's a professor down in Tennessee State University. But her claim to fame really is the co-founder of Black China Caucus. And if you haven't heard of this organization, you should. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about what it's about, its vision and its mission. But as advertised, we're going to try to cover the gamut here in about half an hour conversation. We're going to somehow make it to Bruce Lee, I promise. And you might not see the connection yet, but we're going to get there. So Keisha, thank you so much for doing this, and welcome to this conversation with us at
Thank you.
MacroPolo.
Thank you, Damien, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is a new experience, so it's a learning experience for me today, but I'm excited.
It's all right. We're going to keep it casual. It's fairly new for us, too. It's only our second time really doing this live stream. So you're down in Nashville. We're here in Chicago, not too far away, but I know the temperature difference is quite different. But let's get right into it. So Black China Caucus, you guys were really founded during the pandemic, essentially, I think March 2020,
Yes.
which is sort of right when the pandemic hit the United States. So, but you guys have seemed to have really sprinted out of the gate, and I can see you guys have a lot of stuff already, planned out. And tell me a little bit about kind of, what was behind the idea of it? How do you see it going forward, and what are some of the things you're doing at the organization?
Thank you. So the Black China Caucus, as Damien mentioned, is a new organization, and the goal is to amplify and uplift and empower Black voices in the China space. And by Black, we mean anyone who self-identifies as Black, which means it runs the diaspora, and also anyone who works in China space, whatever their background. So we have a range of industries in our directory. So I'm in academia. We have people who are in politics, who are in other areas as well. And so that's the goal, is to really connect and create a space of professional development. It came about when Mark and I had a phone conversation about late February, early March of last year. And we were just talking about our own experiences in China space and some of the issues that we recognize, some of the gaps in the particular space in terms of the pipeline, why there's not many people, why there's a lack of diversity in the space, and those kind of questions. And so we decided, it's a pandemic, you might as well try something different because we don't know what's going to be tomorrow. And so I think for us, both the pandemic as well as the Black Lives Matter protests that were really, very kind of really addressing some of the issues of systemic racism and those questions about race in the United States were really kind of the impetus about this is the moment to do it. We know these issues because many people who are Black in the China space, they know these issues. You can have a conversation. I mentioned one thing and someone might say, oh, I know. And so there's this kind of anecdotal things, but we wanted to create a space of professional development for people. And so we have four major offerings. The first is our directory, and we have over approximately about 120 people who have signed up since last March, which is a lot more than we expected to have, and so we're excited about that. We also have working groups for our members, so they choose a topic and they'll work together on a topic to hopefully build more internal networking amongst our members who might be working on something related, but maybe in a different field. And then we also have our mentorship program that was really spearheaded by Mark, and it was we just kicked that off last month as well, where we had people who are mentors who identify as allies. Some of our mentors are not Black. They are people who are experts or who have advanced careers in the China space, and they want to be allies and they want to give their time to our mentees. Some who are students, and some who are early, and some who are even mid-career professionals who are trying to think about how can they continue to advance in their careers. And so we see it as being a space of encouragement, in a space of a space where we can kind of continue to allow our members to get professional development skills. So having different events, having different moments where they can continue to grow in their scholarship, and also a space where we can have a community where we can talk about some of the issues that we're affected by, and hopefully we can also begin to start addressing some of these pipeline issues as well. So absolutely.
Amen. I mean, I think diversity of voice is going to be so important in this field, and I'm a big believer in, like you said, cultivating kind of the talent pipeline, which I think we need in every field. So I think that's such an important goal. So how do you, in terms, in addition to the mentorship program, are you also looking at collaborating with other organizations, institutions, looking at internships. I don't know, maybe a MacroPolo per se, but I don't know, so like, are you kind of, collaborating across the board?
Yes, so we are collaborating, and one of the great things is that we have a newsletter every month. And so, if you have any opportunities, whether it is an internship, a job opening position, or even an event that's coming up, please email us, and so we can put it in our newsletter, because that information goes out once a month to all of our members. And we are working on collaboration. We just had one event last night. We hosted a Black History event with the Association for Asian Studies called Black China Trailblazers, and we are looking into other collaborations with other institutions as well. I know I worked a little bit with the National Committee on U.S. China Relations because currently I'm a PIPper. I'm in the PIP 6 program, and so I know they have given us some support and some advice as well. And so we've been fortunate to where a lot of organizations have been reaching out to us and asking us how can they be support, whether it is through being a mentor or through giving us advice, or even just giving us a platform to reach their audience and using their platform to broadcast our events. And so it's been great to see that this has been a welcome change. We were kind of worried about how it's going to be received, but it has been very welcome, where a lot of people have been really excited to say, yes, this is needed, and yes, this is the time. And so that kind of really confirmed for us. Absolutely.
Well, I think one area where you don't really need advice on, I think, is in the creative department. I have to mention this because I looked closely at your logo, and I thought that was just such a clever way of tying the Chinese character Black, hey, into the knuckles. I thought that was just such well done. Like, who's the creative mind behind that?
Actually, it came from another Pipper. We had a chance to, they gave me a space to speak about the Black China Caucus when we had an event last fall. And so one of our Pippers, Tabitha, she was like, after hearing you all talk, she was like, I know this. Yeah. And she was just like, but here's a thought. And so she drew the character in the fist, and it was a little bit different. It was more like to the side, and we kind of made it a little bit upright, but just trying to think about the ideas, and we were still kind of going through them. And she sent us that recommendation, and we took it and modified it. And trust and believe, I think we had a total of like 12 or 16 before we finally chose that one. Like, it was a lot of emails and a lot of voting and conversations, but that kind of shows in terms of what we do, even from the logo to the website design to everything else. We want to be very intentional about what we do to make it where people will recognize us, and it's a space where everything we do has an intent and a purpose behind it. But I get the logo. Everyone's like, it's so beautiful. And I was like, thank you.
Well, I think the logo is very clever, and I know how it is. The creative process can be, it could be challenging, and, a lot of input, a lot of iterations, and then you kind of, a lot of details, really. So I thought that was really, really well done. So, and kudos to Tabitha for coming up with the idea as well. So I wanted to talk, I've seen that you guys have done some events, and I think on your Twitter feed, you've kind of been promoting different people in your network's experience. So I'm curious, in your own experience, how did you get into the China field in the first place? Was it I hear a lot of sort of accidental, like, oh well, I guess I'm in here now, and there's some people who deliberately thought out this kind of path. So it would be really interesting to hear your own path.
Mine was accidental. I was 16. I was in high school. So I am from Lithonia, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta, it's the east of Atlanta. And I went to a predominantly Black public high school. And in my high school, this was back in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001, we had a Chinese language teacher. And I wanted something different. I wanted a challenge. I've always wanted a challenge. My parents, I was like, you different. They weren't surprised. And when I took Chinese, I just really...
That's a good different, right?
Yeah, very good different. They said, stay different. It's okay to be different. They gave me that space to try it out, because I was like, I don't know about this Chinese stuff. And they're like, well, just try. If you give it all, your all. It's all we ask you to just give it your 100%. And if you don't like it, or it doesn't work out, try something else. And so I took Chinese, loved it. My teacher, Teacher Gao, I don't know if she's still out and about, but she was still working in Atlanta a couple of years ago. She actually called me one time. I was teaching. She had found my number in some old planner, and she was like, is this Keisha? And I'm like, Teacher Gao, oh my God. So the best conversation in Chinglish. But it was great. But she was the one who really pushed me to speak Chinese. And I think that encouragement, because again, I was a Black girl from Atlanta, from the South, and no one ever told me you can do this. And she would have myself, another classmate, we would do Chinese language competitions, and we would come in first and second. Like she was my real competition. We would like had an internal rivalry for a couple of years. It was like who got first?
You guys were like battling over like character, like who has the best tones.
Absolutely. And we would go to these competitions, and it was also where it was through Teacher Guy. I went to China for the first time with the root seeking. I think it was a root seeking summer camp, and I was a special guest, and I went with the group, and it was the first time I was actually able to go to China. My parents charged my plane ticket on American Express, and they put me on a plane, and I've been studying and researching China ever since. And so I took another year in high school. I continued my studies in undergrad and grad school, and so it's been an adventure, to say the least. But it's been fun. But it just that 1 week, that one summer, the importance of exposure, it really did make a difference.
Well, so 16-year-old. Yeah. Obviously, probably, I assume, never been to Asia, so you got your foot wet. Which city did you go to?
It was in Beijing. That was my first time going overseas, and I went basically by myself. Like I went with this group in Detroit, and then we flew to Beijing together. And so, and my siblings are like, "You're brave. You're fearless, or you're brave. We don't know which one." They're like, because I couldn't have done that at 16. I was like, well, try everything once.
So you fly from the Motor City to the Forbidden City.
Yes.
Right. What was the thing that left the most lasting impression in that time when you were 16?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, this might be cliche, but I think it was the Great Wall. Like going to that experience and kind of actually melding what you see and what you hear about to actually being able to be in that space and to touch it and to say, actually like experiencing something I never thought I would experience. And so while it may sound cliche, it's like, everyone talks about the Great Wall. For me, that was a moment. I remember that very clearly in terms of just walking on the wall and being there, being able to like just sit in the moment and say, wow, like I'm actually here in China. And that was because we were busy. They had us rushing from place to place to place. We were doing all these different events. But I just remember the Great Wall was the one for me, that kind of space and just really just like reflecting, looking around like I'm actually here. And that moment of just connecting it all together was the one that really stood out to me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't care what people say. I think it's always when you go to the Great Wall for the first time, you're like, what? Because it's on so many people's bucket lists, right? Yeah. So you have to see it, and it is quite impressive. No matter which, even kind of the newer touristy sections, I think for a first timer, it's still quite awe-inspiring. I think. So 16. Fast forward, you're now a historian,
yes,
right? And you teach at Tennessee State University, and so as a historian, tell me a little bit about what kind of work you're working on yourself as it relates, I would assume, on race and identity issues or other areas.
Absolutely. So I have a few projects, but what I call my research overall is the area called Sino-Black Relations, where I look at the ways in which the Chinese diaspora meets with the Black diaspora in some different ways, and thinking through what happens in those moments of interactions, intersections, and kind of convergences. My dissertation was focused on Mao era, particularly 49 to 1972, although I do research a little bit early, like through some kind of early Republican era research as well, but I kind of focus more so on the Maoist period. So that's kind of the core of that research project. And I'm also thinking about shifting into some more contemporary conversations as well, thinking about how we think through these ideas of race, identity, and also ideas of networks of difference, how we think about identity formation in places East Asia, and how that relates to Blackness, conceptions of Blackness, and the Black other, kind of foreign other. One thing we talked about last night in our talk was that when you go to China, as a Black person, it is a little different. And so sometimes how we think about what's formulating those ideas and kind of formulating our experiences, how do we think about it from both sides? How they have ideas about what Blackness is or means, or American means in China, and how we're navigating those spaces through our experiences. And so I try to look at the ways in which these ideas are formed and thinking about it. And I like to think about it in terms of, I call it networks of difference, because I don't want to, superimpose ideas about race, ethnicity onto kind of these Western constructs onto China. So that's why I kind of put that idea of networks of difference out there, because there are different ways in which identity is formed in a system that has, the Xiaoshu Minzu and this kind of ethnic nationalities versus racial groups. And so thinking through those ideas as well. So it's just, things identity is always fun. And I think it's just always been an issue of just like really interested in issues of race and ethnicity, especially since my first trip to China, where people just really, even when I was 16, I didn't know what they were saying. They were just like, everyone just kind of stopped and looked at me like it was just something where I was like, why are they staring at me? I'm not used to this. And it was just like every time I go, the more I learned, the more I was able to speak and have conversations with people, learning why they were just interested in who I was and kind of looking at my appearance and what that was about.
So by Sino-Black, Black, you probably mean more beyond just Black Americans, but
like the Black diaspora.
Black diaspora.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. So, I mean, how have your do you think that I guess you've probably done some field research as well, and talking to Chinese interlocutors. I mean, how do you think they're thinking about kind of race and ethnicity issues? Obviously, China's there's a specific narrative there about ethnicity there that we all know about, and it's of course a lot more homogenous than the United States. So obviously, the frameworks are very different to begin with. So how did you handle all those kinds of issues? It seems very curious and challenging,
Yeah. So one of the things I'm trying to think through in my research is thinking about. As China is, as they've grown over the years, like even when I started learning Chinese, it wasn't popular then. And now it's like, it's the language to know, right? So even thinking about how China has played a greater role in the world stage, China's going to the world and the world is coming to China. So these questions are coming to the forefront more and more. And I think we've seen some good examples and we've seen some bad examples. That's what's happened in that space. And so for me, the way I try to navigate it is to think through looking at ideas such as like kinship, looking at the role ideas about blood, looking at ideas about nationality and how that ties into these concepts of thinking through it. And so the way I want to think about it is thinking about where are they going when they interact in these places. So for instance, the Belt and Road, you're going all over the world. What does that mean in terms of those moments of exchange? Will it lead to greater understanding or lead to a more solidified, ossified ideas about Blackness? How do we see this happening or changing? I think also we look at scales. Sometimes it's the national level, where is it the government policy that's reflected back and front to the people, or is it the people? Like, what are different scales and how we need to get these ideas penetrated to different levels of society so that people will be more kind of engaging in these kind of conversations and talks as well. I will say that I am kind of optimistic because I did have two graduate students, two Chinese students, who actually reached out to me. They wanted to finish their project. And I think one actually did her undergrad work in the US. And so she was like, I want to do a project. They actually did a digital project about what it means to be Black in China. But they did it for a Chinese audience. They interviewed people who they knew in Beijing, who they met through Black Liberty China and their events. They have an Africa Week. They have an Africa Week every year. And it was just a conversation. It was just nice for it to, like, this. They're taking an initiative to put this out there, to have conversations. And so I'm optimistic about the way this is going to happen. But that was just one thing that gave me kind of hope, like there is a conversation here and people are having them. And so while they have some moments where you have some oops, you have some very bad commercials here and there, some other events that happen on a global scale, but there is also work being done as well where people are really trying to push these conversations in some really meaningful and impactful ways.
That's fascinating. So when you talk about examples of sort of how Chinese perceive race and identity and ethnicity, it occurred to me there was a pretty prominent case of a young woman named Lo Jing. I forget what year it was, maybe like mid 2010s or something like that, where she was biracial, she was Chinese and African American descent, and I think there were a lot of there's a lot of controversy surrounding her on, it's also when the Chinese internet was starting to get, get going, and there was a lot of, web commentary about her. Have there been any incidents or episodes like that since? I think you were talking to me about another athlete that was something like that.
Yeah, so in addition to Lo Jing and her experiences, there's also a young guy named Ding Hui, who was actually a volleyball player for the Chinese state. He played on the national team. And so I know of those two. I'm not sure. I know there might be others I'm not aware of in the China space, but I think their identity and their existence is important because as China is doing more engagement with a variety of African nations and they're sending people and workers to different places, people are people and they're going to engage and have interactions and they're going to have children. And so my question is thinking through the next generation. What about those children who are being born? So I know, for instance, we had a chance to be in Hong Kong in January of last year before everything kind of shut down. And there was a guy who was doing some nonprofit work. He was from, I want to say Togo, and he was living in Hong Kong. He had a Chinese wife, and he was like, there's a growing community in Hong Kong where they have a lot of, different people meeting and marrying and having children. And there's a new community. And so we were talking about that as well. So while those two are kind of more famous examples because of their celebrity, either it was through their athleticism or through this kind of reality show, there is a whole new community of children who are going to be born. And so I guess my question is, how Lo Jing and Ding Hui were perceived, is that going to shape how these other children are going to be received and perceived in China? And so I think if that's the case, we're going to think about what does that mean for their identity and how they see themselves in terms of their racial or national identity. How does that impact them?
So that's really interesting. That kind of segues into something I've been thinking about in terms of sort of more famous examples. We talk about it in the sports world, right? Or even in pop culture. But in the sports world, you have beyond China, you have. I'm really into tennis. I don't know if you are, but obviously
I played tennis in high school. I'm into tennis.
Are you okay? All right.
I thought it was the next Serena. I was like, no, it didn't work out that way.
So we talk about who's your favorite player?
Oh, I love Serena. I'm a Serena fan. I mean, all day.
She's the dope.
And I'm rooting for her daughter too. She has like videos on Instagram where Alexa's Olympians out there playing. I was like, she's next. I'm cheering for her already. She's not even started yet.
Think about that Coco Gauff.
Oh, I like her too.
You like her too, yeah.
Yeah.
She's like the rising star, right?
She's young. She's gonna be around for a while. Yeah. And of course, I always, got to give love to Venus too. Give both Williams sisters.
Yeah, of course. They're incredible players. So another incredible player is Naomi Osaka, the Naomi Osaka phenomenon from Japan. That's obviously a little bit outside of China. But what do you think about? Do you see something like? I mean, you talk about the volleyball player, but do you think that those types of things could have a bigger effect in China and kind of revising, prevailing views about race and identity?
I don't know, because it's interesting. Because I know in Japan, they the national ideas about nationalism and national narrative is that we all come from one particular line of descent, and then we all kind of fall into this more homogenous identity. China purports to have, plurality and diversity. They try to say we have the 56 ethnic nationalities, so we're more diverse, even though the overwhelming majority is the Han, over 90%. But they still put this idea that we have these other 55 groups, therefore we are diverse, right? I think they're going to have to learn from what's happening in Japan, because I think Japan also has two examples outside of Naomi Osaka, also Ariana Miyamoto, who was Miss Japan in 2016, and how her experience were when she was able to get kind of international celebrity, because she won. She was in the Miss World competition that year, so she went from Miss Japan to also the Miss World and had this global platform. She began doing interviews and discussing her experience as a biracial, or they call hafu individual in Japan. And so I think what she experienced, what she talked about, really gave a space for Naomi Osaka to really push back, because I think when you think about Naomi Osaka, she is a advocate on and off the court. Like, she has been pushing back against them whitewashing her image or lightening her image on ads. She has been very vocal about I am Japanese and recognizing both her maternal and her paternal ancestry and her heritage. And so I think her kind of forwardness and her vocalness, both these women putting their platforms out there, is going to really hopefully give China some other ways to think about race and think about these biracial individuals and multiracial individuals and what that means for them. So the celebrities, I think, are going to be using their platform, maybe helping push these conversations along in popular culture and thinking through these ideas.
So kind of continuing with this theme about representation, whether it's in sports or maybe pop culture or I guess Hollywood is also a big topic right now. Maybe, some of the people watching might not pay attention to him as much, but if he were alive, he would be 80 years old as of last year. And I'm talking about Bruce Lee, obviously.
Yes, we get to the Bruce Lee part, so thank y'all for holding out.
I told you we would somehow make it from Black China Caucus to Bruce Lee. It all connects. I've been rediscovering him in some ways lately, because a lot of people, in the sports world, the big thing right now is obviously mixed martial arts. And a lot of people credit Bruce Lee as being kind of the granddaddy of that. Yeah. And also, you hear really famous boxers like Sugar Ray Leonard back in the day who say Bruce Lee was the GOAT. because he was so good. And he was such innovator too, because he didn't practice specifically martial arts, Chinese martial arts per se. He adopted a lot of different, elements. But what I wanted to say is just sort of, his iconic status in the Black community just seems very, very, it's very staggering. And I just wanted to kind of understand more of that sort of, he really was somebody that was kind of a legend.
Mm-hmm.
And so that to me is a very interesting kind of, Asian American and Black American connection way back, like right after the Civil Rights Movement.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Bruce Lee is very transnational. Like, he was born, has Hong Kong roots, which was British Hong Kong then, his Chinese roots, and also American roots. So he is one of
He's actually partially German.
German. There we go.
So he's very multiracial. Yeah.
And I think his identity allows people to kind of gravitate to him. But I think in terms of African Americans specifically, it was the films, and it was kind of the motif. You look at his films, all of them have this kind of underdog, where the underdog wins. And so that narrative of the underdog winning was part of that. His films were also during kind of the era of what we call Blaxploitation films. And so you can see in some of those films, they're either mimicking his moves or they're even replicating his outfits in some of those films as well. And so we see that kind of example. And I think there are then there's two reasons why. His use of his body, and I think for many African Americans, it was during enslavement, when they were, enslaved, they couldn't have control of their body. They were seen as property and moved from place to place and had no real control over their own livelihood, including their own body, what to do with their bodies. And so his use of his body and control was very much one of those things where you own yourself and you can control yourself as well. But also thinking about the use of your body, as you mentioned, it was right the Civil Rights Movement, and how they used their bodies to like be physically in spaces where they were told they shouldn't be. So the sit-ins that students were doing, the protests where people were, using their bodies as a means of kind of advocating for change. And so I think his use of his body and his kind of philosophy and the way his kind of demeanor and his kind of just complex identity really kind of resonate with a lot of African Americans. And there's a really great article by Amy Ongiri where she talks about, why Bruce Lee really resonates, his kind of transnational identity resonates with the African American community. But I remember I've had conversations with some elders, and they're like, yeah, I remember going to the cinema and sitting on a Saturday and watching a Bruce Lee movie marathon, and it was just the films and to see this a man who's doing this, because if we think about it, prior to him there were no real Asian or Asian American men on the scene or seen like that in the cinema in the U.S. They were either seen as like the Fu Manchu, the evil, plotting, despicable, an Asian male, or they were seen as emasculated and very docile. And so he comes in and shows this kind of power, this force, and he just really connected with them in some really great ways. And it's just, I show Bruce Lee every now and then with my students, and they're like, the dubbing is horrible and the sound is weird and the audio is like, but this is okay, we'll get past it. By 20 minutes in, they're like, cheering for him, and he's gonna beat up 20 people at one time. I mean, they just get into it because there's still something about those films that just resonate, and students love it. And it's just great to see how he does still have that connection to different demographics. And absolutely, yeah.
The favorite is he and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were, and that fight scene where Kareem's like 7 feet or something, and he's obviously not 7 feet, and that fight scene was just so different and interesting. And I think Bruce Lee's very first student was a guy named Jesse Glover, who's a Black American as well. Wow. So I think it's just really fascinating, and just to show how influential he is. And I have to end on sort of he influenced hip hop bands like Wu-Tang Clan, who was a big fan of martial arts. And I just discovered today that the name came from a 1983 movie called Shaolin and Wu-Tang something. And it was just a movie that I never heard of, but I guess that's how RZA, the member, he was really into it. And I think you were saying he still practices Taoism, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think I had I've worked with a grad student. He was like, he wrote a book, and he's really big into East Asian philosophy and very much into Taoism. And so it's just really kind of interesting to see like there's a connection, all these different connections. Now I'm thinking about, there was a Netflix show a couple of years ago. It was about hip hop. I can't remember it. The name of it, I'm blanking, but one of the characters was named Shaolin. Now that you mention it,
oh really?
He was a hip hop artist. He was one of the characters, but he was like trying to build, because it was like a show that was kind of discussing the kind of birth of hip hop in New York, And so it was not necessarily actual factual people, but it was just different characters who kind of were interspersing historical facts at one point in time. But one of the main characters named Shaolin. And I think about it, I'm like, oh, now it's all these different connections are coming back together.
Well, you know what? We could talk about this stuff, I think, for another half an hour at least. And so this is not the last conversation, but we wanted to be respectful of your time. We're up against the time, but I want to talk about all this stuff, and maybe we could do it in a future Black China Caucus event. And just so everyone knows, visit blackchinacaucus.org. That's the website. Reach out to Keisha, and I'm sure she would love to hear from you, and you can reach out to me as well. But like I said, we want to keep this conversation going and figure out ways maybe we can collaborate in the future. But really, thank you so much for taking the time to talk, to do your first live stream.
Yes.
Do more often in the future.
I will say this. I want to do a special shout out to the Black China Caucus team. So Mark, Michael, and Navanda, and to our members, and also to the National Committee. They actually made us do media training, and I hope that I made Jan Barris proud. Part of our media training. So I hope that I make them proud, because this was different, but I'm enjoying this. So thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these ideas. Absolutely. And we'll look to part 2 in the future.
Thanks a lot. Until next time.
All right. Bye-bye.